by Reddito Surthicraken 108. I live in the western suburbs of Boston. I realize I'm not exactly in the middle of nowhere, but sometimes it sort of feels like I am. My street is even located between two relatively major roads, however there's also a lot of farmland in the area, and it's a pretty wooded area too. In fact, my backyard is right on the edge of the woods. There's some trails back there that I've explored, as well as a few other trails nearby. There's a few stone walls, and old direction markers back there, but other than that not a whole lot. Due to the fact that I basically live in the woods, I see a lot of animals in my neighborhood. Aside from the standard squirrels, chipmunks, and birds, I tend to see a lot of rabbits, deer, wild turkeys, raccoons, a few possums, and even the occasional fox. However, I've started seeing coyotes in the area, and I'm worried that there might be more to them than they appear. On the other side of the woods from me there is a house. It's not part of my neighborhood, and I think it's actually another town since I'm right on the line. During the fall and winter, when the leaves are down, it's very easy to see through the woods to that house, and I notice they tend to keep weird and inconsistent hours. Sometimes the house has every light off as soon as the sun goes down, and sometimes they're up and about at 3 a.m. Sometimes as I'm just getting up in the morning, someone is leaving for work, and sometimes there's no sign of any movement from there in the mornings. They also have a light on their roof that I later found out is one of those old chicken-shaped weather vanes that for some reason lights up at night. Nothing too unusual about that, except sometimes I see it flashing on and off all night, and sometimes multiple nights in a row. I've never actually spoken to any of the people that live there, and I barely even speak to anyone in my own neighborhood. However, one person who I have spoken to a bit is my next-door neighbor Roger. He's an elderly man, probably in his 70s, and I think he's a widower. He has too much time on his hands, as I often see him doing a lot of yard work, even though the neighborhood has a service that does it for us. He's also known to take on projects in other people's yards as well, and do work in communal areas. This includes simple stuff, like taking people's trash cans from the curb to their garage after the trash pickup has occurred, to larger stuff, such as trimming tree branches. I've joked that he's the unofficial caretaker of the neighborhood. I don't really talk to Roger often, but one time he told me that the people who live in the house on the other side of the woods are a Native American family. For some reason, I thought that might explain some stuff I've seen in the woods. See, I neglected to mention this before, but there's this crudely made teepee out of branches right off the trail. It's not really big enough for anyone to go into, but it's kinda cool. I have no idea who built it, but it's been back there for at least the 5 years I've lived here. There's some rocks in front of it in a fire pit style, but they seem to change position sometimes. I've also seen what look like beer cans from the 1970s in the vicinity. I wonder if that's when the teepee was built. I'm not saying that the Native Americans that live in that house are definitely the ones behind the teepee, but it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibilities. Some of the old stone trail markers have what could be Native American drawings on them too, but again, anyone could have done that. I don't know whether the Native Americans are responsible for the stuff in the woods or not, but I think they might have to do with the increased presence of coyotes. As I'm sure many of you are aware, there's a thing called a skinwalker in Native American folklore. In case anyone isn't familiar with them, supposedly certain Native Americans can take on the form of an animal by wearing a pelt of their fur. I've typically seen them portrayed as taking the form of wolves or coyotes, but I'm not sure if they're able to take the form of other mammals too. When I first saw the coyotes, I didn't immediately make the connection. It was late August and I was driving home one evening just as the sun was starting to set. As I rounded the corner towards my street, I saw what I think were two coyotes walking down the road. They definitely weren't foxes, and I'm pretty sure wolves don't live around here, so they must have been coyotes. I had never seen a coyote around my house in the 5 years I lived here, but I always suspected they were around. I used to live a few towns over and I'd occasionally see one there, and more often than not I'd hear them howling. I actually thought it was kinda cool at first, as I love seeing animals. A few nights later, I was chilling on my back patio, probably having some weed and beer, when I heard rustling coming from the woods. This wouldn't be the first time an animal in the woods scared me at night time. One time I was in my backyard in October, no doubt having just watched a slasher movie, when I heard what sounded like heavy footsteps in the woods. It ended up just being a deer, which I found out when I shined a light in the woods and saw a pair of glowing eyes looking back at me, but as you can imagine, the whole thing was a bit freaky. If only for a little while. This time though, it was a coyote that walked out of the woods. I have no idea if it was one of the ones I had seen the other day or a different one, but it walked towards my patio and just stood there for a second. I tried to take a picture, but it all of a sudden ran off back into the woods. As I went back inside, I noticed the outline of Roger standing at his back door. I wondered if he was watching the coyote too. I didn't realize this until later, but the outdoor lights of the Native American house had been on the whole time. It was at this point that I made the connection between the coyote and the Native Americans, and I started talking to my friend about the possibility of skinwalkers being in the area. Of course, my friend didn't really take me very seriously, and frankly, I wasn't sure if I even took myself seriously. We both like to entertain the possibility of certain aspects of the paranormal, including the existence of cryptozoological creatures, like skinwalkers, and related creatures such as fleshgates or the goat man, but we lack any concrete evidence. The next day I saw Roger working in his garden, and I asked him if he had ever seen coyotes in the area. He said, not for several years, but was noticing them coming back. He also warned me to be careful if I saw them not to get too close as they are prone to attack. He seemed almost worried as he told me this. That night I was back on my patio, probably drinking and smoking again, when I started to hear rustling from the woods again. The sounds were coming from various spots in the woods, but I wasn't able to see anything. I then started to hear howling. Some of the noise sounded like it was very close to me, while others sounded a bit further away. I noticed every single light on at the Native American house on the other side of the woods too, and was wondering if they were behind all this after all. Suddenly I heard what sounded like a loud bang, almost like a gunshot, and the howling stopped, followed by every single light at the house going off at once. I sat there for a few seconds when I noticed Roger standing in his backyard. "Get back inside," he told me. "What the hell is going on?" I asked him. "Get back inside," he repeated, offering no explanation. I gathered my things and went back in. I watched out the window for a while and saw Roger standing at the edge of the woods. I realized he was staring down a coyote. After what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes, the coyote turned around and left. Roger stayed there for a while longer before going back inside his house. The next day I tried to get answers, but Roger wouldn't acknowledge what had happened. Several weeks had passed, and I hadn't seen any coyotes or any other odd things going on. By this point it was early October, and the events that night in August had become a distant memory. I was coming home from work one evening when I saw Roger out in his garden like I often did. I waved hello to him, and noticed him waving me over. "I won't be able to take care of this neighborhood much longer," he told me. I didn't understand what Roger meant, but he went on to explain that he was planning on moving to be closer to his children, and just didn't have the strength to take care of the neighborhood anymore. I told him that he could always take it easy and didn't have to always be out and about doing stuff on the street, but he said that's not what he meant. Roger stuck around for most of the rest of the fall, but one day in early December he was gone. I didn't even see any moving trucks. It was as if he had just packed up and left overnight. I did, however, find a note he left taped to my door. The note read, "I'm sorry for leaving so abruptly, but it's time for me to go now. I felt myself getting weaker this past summer and can't stay here much longer. If you see a coyote, do not engage it. If you can, get indoors immediately, otherwise, remain perfectly still until it has walked away. Good luck." I thought back to the night in August when the coyotes were coming out of the woods and Roger seemingly scared them off. I know I had always joked about Roger being the unofficial caretaker of the neighborhood, but what if he actually was responsible for protecting it? What if the Native Americans that live in the house on the other side of the woods have some connection to the skinwalkers, or are skinwalkers themselves? They seem to have some sort of ancient connection to the woods. What if they have the same sort of connection to the land beyond the woods that is my street? What if Roger's physical presence was able to keep the skinwalkers out of the neighborhood? He mentioned he hadn't seen coyotes in the area in years and seemed worried when he told me about them showing up again. It was almost as if his power to keep the Skinwalkers away was somehow weakening, which is why they were able to show up in the area again. I know he was able to still keep them away that night in August, but the fact that they were able to get that close was a bad sign. That must be what he meant when he said he didn't have the strength to take care of the neighborhood anymore and that he's getting weaker. Maybe he knew that he'd soon be powerless to stop the Skinwalkers, and he left for his own safety. Shit, I've been tossing this theory around for over a month now, but this is the first time I've written it down and read it back to myself. I know it sounds really weird, but the more I think about it, the more I believe it. As much as I like to entertain the existence of the paranormal, I do tend to look for logical explanations for everything, but for this I have none. The coyotes are getting closer too. I hadn't seen any for a few weeks since Roger had left, but on January 10th it was a full moon. They call that one the wolf moon because supposedly wolves tend to howl more at the moon that time of year than others. I didn't hear wolves, but I heard something howling that night, and it sent shivers down my spine. This past Tuesday, I was driving home from work when I saw a coyote cross the road on the street right before mine. It seemed to be looking directly at me as it walked by. On Friday night, I was coming home from the bar when I saw a coyote standing right in my driveway. I honked my horn and flashed my lights at it, but it just stood there, staring right at me and growling. There was no way I was getting out of my car. I sat there for about 10 minutes, and even contemplated driving away, but eventually, the coyote walked off. Then last night it was snowing a bit. I turned on the light in my backyard to see how much snow had fallen, and how heavy it was snowing when I saw a coyote standing in my backyard, even though it was snowing. I was able to see the outdoor lights were on at the Native American's house and their weather vane was blinking like crazy again. I quickly turned off the light and closed the shades. I took a look in my backyard this morning and saw there were paw prints in the snow leading towards the woods. The prints, however, stopped just in front of the entrance to the woods and sets of human-looking footprints appeared ahead of them. I didn't dare follow them. With Roger, the neighborhood guardian, no longer living here, it seems like there's nothing that will keep the Skinwalkers out. I don't know what will happen, but it's dark out, and I hear howling coming from the woods again.